This is our first ABODE Academy, and we're so excited you're all here. My name is Beverly Tumala. I'm a hospice nurse with Christus Hospice here in San Antonio, and I'm on the board at ABODE, and I'm chairman of the education committee. And first of all, I'd really like to thank our education community for all of their hard work, coming up with topics and just kind of organizing this event so that we could do this. Just trying to do something remote was kind of tough, because we'd love to be sitting with everybody and talking, but this is the best we could do. So I hope you really, really enjoy it. What we're trying to do, and one of our goals, is to make ABODE a leading community resource in the topic of death and dying. Our hope is that this role continues to grow and expand, and that we will just be that for our city. And so we're looking at different, so with that said, I would like to welcome our guest speakers tonight. We have Patsy and Edwin Sasek and Mary Thorsby. Patsy and Edwin are our founders. They're our vision, and they had the tenacity to turn their dream into reality. And we call that place ABODE. We have welcomed over 200 guests and supported their numerous family members and friends. So we don't just reach out to patients, we reach out to their families and their friends. Everything that makes ABODE the special place that it is comes from their love and dedication and their inspiration. After hearing them tonight, you'll want to be a part of this home and do what you can to keep it going. At the end of the evening, toward the second half of our program, Mary Thorsby will finish our program up. She has more than 25 years of executive level marketing, communication, and community outreach excellence. She's been our executive director since about October, and we're so lucky to have her. She's been a mover and a shaker, and she has just met our challenges head on, and we're just so lucky that she joined us. Tonight, she's going to share how this community continues to thrive. So before we get started, kind of one of the things that we do, we start with a contemplative tradition. And Edwin's going to start by centering us with a prayer.
Hi, everyone. Part of the way that we have always gathered is to start with just a moment of centering, of becoming present to the moment. And it really reflects the contemplative nature of ABODE, which is an invitation for us to be present to the moment and to ourselves and to those that we're caring for at ABODE. So to do that, we're just going to take a moment of silence. And I'd like all of you, if you would, just to feel comfortable in your chairs while you're sitting, and notice your feet on the floor and your rear end in your seat, your hands in your lap, and invite you to just close your eyes for a moment. If you prefer keeping them open, that's okay too. And really, as we think about being present, this simple way of being present, of noticing ourselves sitting and noticing ourselves being held by gravity, so to speak, we can really tune into things that maybe we might not ordinarily notice. So although it's so ordinary to sit quietly and to sit with our feet on the ground and to sit in relationship to others, this is an invitation just to notice those very ordinary things and how they impact how we live in the world. So if you close your eyes, and we'll take just literally 1 minute, and I'll ring a bell, and we'll just sit and notice your breath as you breathe in and out. Thank you all. Well, Patsy and I are going to tell the ABODE story. And, you know, most stories like ABODE, there's something about the creation of them and how they happened that helps to inform what an organization will be like. And so when I was studying hospice care at the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Hospice Institute in New Mexico in the late 80s and early 90s, I was introduced to how hospice was offered and provided in the Middle Ages in Europe. And it was an interesting story because it impacted how I would begin to think about care for people at the end of life. So communities, particularly monasteries and convents, often received people who were quite ill. Sometimes they were travelers on a journey who needed help. And so they would go to convents and monasteries, and oftentimes those people would receive the help that they sought. And if people were quite ill, they would go ahead and care for that person until that person died. And what they offered that person was the best of what they had. So they offered the very best straw mats and the very best food and the very best wine and the very best of what they had, because their vision of what was happening with that person was that much closer to God. So that really had an impact on me, and I began not long thereafter to think about what that might be like to have a community that might offer something similar based on those precepts, the precepts of spiritual care and comfort. And so I, as it turns out, was finishing the program, the 2-year program, and I went to Uvalde, Texas, because the Hospice Institute had a relationship with a small hospice in Texas called Heart of the Hills Hospice. And I went to Uvalde, Texas, and at Uvalde to begin a 3-month internship, I met Patsy. And so Patsy was starting as the volunteer coordinator at that little hospice, and I was new in town, and we began to get to know each other.
And when I started, I didn't really know anything about hospice. It was new to our little town. It was really new to the United States. It had only been sort of a grassroots effort that started on the East Coast, and it had only been in existence for about 20 years. So I had a completely different career before that, and I was a designer and a manufacturer, and I got this job at hospice. And I remember I had to look up the word. I didn't even know what it meant. And my very first week there, I met Edwin. It was his first week, and we went through training. The training was really wonderful. It was extensive. And I was so enthralled with the story that he just told of the hospices during the Middle Ages. And we had an 11-county area that we serviced through this little hospice. And so they started sending us out on the road for these little day trips to talk about hospice to Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and churches and, you know, women's groups and things like that. And so we started traveling and talking about hospice, and we, you know, we got to know each other, and we laughed and we worked really hard, and it was sort of a crossroads in my life, and it was very life-changing.
And so at the end of 3 months, I had to go back to New Mexico because the internship was over. And so, you know, there was this romance that had started, but also this opportunity to really share with someone what I dreamed about and what I envisioned. And so I remember being in the Gila wilderness in New Mexico on my way back to Taos, and I was writing a letter to Patsy, and in the letter, I described this vision of a home, of a community of some sort that would be created eventually.
I still have the letter. I was just looking at the letters he wrote me from the Gila wilderness. It was dated June 1st, 1993. And when he told me of his dream to start a community of people who would care for the dying.
And so we ended up, we were married in 1994. We moved to San Antonio in 1997, working from a rural hospice and coming to urban hospice, which really is a whole different type of organizational structure to care for 200 people instead of caring for 20. And we started to talk and continue to talk about this idea. And what had changed really was, as a hospice chaplain and grief counselor, I was really witnessing on a regular basis how people receiving hospice care didn't always, and very frequently actually, didn't have adequate housing or caregiving. And so this idea that that we would create something continued to build in our thinking, and we talked about the idea to a lot of people. And one of the things that we ultimately came to in our conversations between ourselves and among others was the sense of the community that we would like to build that had as its grounding a contemplative tradition. So if we look at the history of hospice and spiritual traditions and the traditions that are thousands of years old, oftentimes what they teach is how to live and how to die. And so what we wanted to be able to focus on in our care for others and our care for ourselves were exactly those two things: how to live and how to die. And we would be able to learn from the traditions, from Christianity, from Buddhism, from Muslim traditions, from Native American traditions. And fortunately, in my training at the Hospice Institute in New Mexico, we were surrounded by communities of exactly those spiritual practitioners. So there was a mosque down the road from the Hospice Institute, and of course there's a strong Franciscan Christian tradition in New Mexico, and the Native American tradition also is very strong. And as you probably know, Buddhism has a strong grounding in New Mexico as well. So we were hearing at the Kubler-Ross Hospice Institute teachers coming in and talking about their traditions, and that certainly did influence me in thinking about how we might be able to create a home for people who are dying in a community that would be open to learning from those traditions and learning something about how that practice changes how we interact in the world and how we care for people who are dying. So that was sort of the seed which we planted in 1993, and finally in 2010, after some other events that were life-changing and significant, we organized our first meeting to form an organization that would eventually become called ABODE.
And at first we gathered together about 20 like-minded people in our home, and we had our first meeting. And at first we weren't sure what it would look like. We had always thought, because it was early, that in the stages of hospice, that it would be a freestanding hospice. But as time went on, we realized it was too expensive. It was becoming, more hospices were opening. There were more regulations, and we realized it just wasn't going to be possible to do that. We had looked at all kinds of places to do that, and we realized it just wasn't going to work. So we started having meetings from people who are still part of ABODE right now that started with us in 2010. And it seemed like people just came to us at just the right time when we needed them. And we had somebody that I was associated with who was a lawyer that offered to do our 501c3 pro bono. And that happened in 2010. And we started working on our policies and procedures. But the main thing that happened was that Edwin decided to call an old classmate and friend.
Yes, and in the meantime, before the phone call, I'd been able to be encouraged by some teachers that I felt would be interested in listening to the vision. So I was able to meet Roshi Joan Halifax from Upaya in Santa Fe. And Joan has been teaching people who are caring for dying people professionally in a program called Being with Dying. It's an 8-day program where people from all professions, doctors, nurses, chaplains, social workers, etc., body workers, come together for an 8-day training to experience teachings from traditions about ways that not only help care for people who are dying, but help care for ourselves. So she had encouraged me, and I told her about the dream and the vision. She said, just do it. Another person that was very instrumental at that time too was another Buddhist teacher whose name is Franco Sasek. And Frank founded Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco during the AIDS movement, during AIDS in the I guess it would have been the mid 80s or the late 80s. And he had a wonderful way of encouraging people at the Zen Hospice Project to learn about caring for the dying. But also another feature was too that they did it outside of the normal hospice programs. In other words, it wasn't a Medicare certified hospice. They found a home in San Francisco where they cared for people who were dying, and a lot of volunteers were involved in their care. So that was very important to me as well in my thinking. And I had also a chance to meet, who am I thinking of? Richard. Father Richard Rohr in San Antonio, and described the project to him too, and the encouragement to do that was also forthcoming from him. So so it was wonderful to be able to have those encouragements, and still not quite know what we were going to do. How could we do something that had a contemplative focus in hospice when we didn't want to become an organization that had to have Medicare certification? Our ideas were different. Well, I called a friend of mine from El Rito, New Mexico, who attended the hospice program with me. His name is John McKelvey. And I said, John, what's going on? And this was about 2009. He said, well, I just opened a home for the dying. And I said, you did what? So it was one of those aha eureka moments when he described what he had done. He opened a 3-bedroom home in Midland, Michigan, after he had attended and worked as a volunteer and a staff person at Mother Teresa House in Lansing, Michigan. Mother Teresa House opened in 1997, the year Mother Teresa died. And it was this vision also that they shared with John, which he shared with us, how to open a home that could care for three guests who met those same criteria. They were hospice patients, they didn't have adequate housing, and they didn't have adequate caregiving. And also, the last and important feature of it was that there was no cost for the person to be cared for in the homes that they had created.
So now we had a seed kit. We knew that it was working in Michigan, and it was an aha moment. We had been studying. We had studied for a year Joan Halifax's book with our group of people on being with dying, and then suddenly we had this way that paved the way for us to know that this could actually be done. And we were sort of like full steam ahead. We had got our 501c3, and John was so generous. He gave us, samples of their policies and procedures and their volunteer training manual. And his home was an old rectory that the Catholic Church had given them. So their home was essentially, like $1 a year or something. They rented it from the Catholic Church. But we didn't have that. So not only were we starting, to form the basis of how this home would be operated, but we were looking for a home.
And we were able to take the policies and procedures and adapt them to what we had in mind. we took a trip, a couple of board members, myself and Liz Newhouse, took a trip to Midland, Michigan to see John in a very, very cold and snowy winter, and to see how they were operating at at the Tony and Trish house, and got some really good hands-on training and encouragement. And I think what was really true for us in the very beginning days of starting to form Abode was we were given a lot of tools. And in fact, one of the tools that Abode has also furthered is the idea of passing it forward. So, we hope, as other people might come to Abode and ask for support and help, that we'll be able to offer that kind of encouragement as well. So we formed the 501c3. We became a 501c3 in November of 2010. We'd had our first fundraiser, which were all the organizing committee members sitting around and taking on roles. Who will do PR and marketing? Who will do the volunteer training manual? Who will help to form the board? All of these things that needed to happen, we did in a half-day retreat. And we passed the hat afterwards, and we raised our first $85.
And we thought that was great. And then we took a trip to Taos, and we were trying to decide on a name, because I'm a marketing person, and one of our other board members, Peter Zarmak, and another one, Petra, who has a printing company, we all knew we had to have a good name and to start with our marketing for that, because we needed people to know what we were doing. So on a trip, again, to New Mexico, we thought of the name Abode, which of course simply means home. And then we really worked hard, because all of us were in agreement that we wanted it to also be called Contemplative Care for the Dying. And I remember in a meeting saying, as a marketing person, that's an awfully long name. And yet we wanted people to know that that's what made us different as a home, that we care for people in a contemplative way. And everyone that came as a volunteer or a staff member learned those contemplative traditions so that they could be present with our guests. And so we made it Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. And we're really so glad we did, because it's who we are. And that tradition continues. And that is what makes us different from now. In the country, there are 72 homes, or about to be homes, like in the Omega network of homes, similar to Abode.
And yet, one of the things that we could say about all of the homes in the Omega Home Network is they all have their own, the basic foundations would be similar to Abode's. People who don't have adequate housing or caregiving. For the most part, they would be at no cost, although some homes do have a fee to cover expenses. So these homes are having an impact, and it was also referred to at one point as the social hospice network. So what's really important for us to remember too is that the hospice movement has been so important in the United States to help people who are dying have adequate care. And that care, although it is holistic in the sense that spiritual care is provided, social workers also are involved in the care of the person, volunteers are involved as well. But one of the things that really makes what Abode does and these other homes do is it offers something that's more along the social spiritual side of things. In other words, there's one aspect that's true about hospice care is that if a person receives hospice care, that the hospice agency doesn't provide a place for that person to live. So there's a gap oftentimes in what people can expect from a hospice agency to be able to provide. And really, as you probably are aware, nursing homes cost about $6,000 a month to live in, if a person is eligible for Medicaid, he or she might get some help depending on what part of the United States he lives in. In Texas, Medicaid beds are becoming are more and more rare. So so we were really feeling and exploring another way to be able to care for people that's also the beginning of a movement. And so we had these ideas, and we weren't sure exactly how we would create a home. We weren't sure if we would rent a home. We weren't sure if we would rent an apartment complex, a couple of rooms in order to care for people. We weren't sure exactly what we would do, but we began right away to plan to build something.
Well, we actually looked at a lot of properties first.
Remember in the very first days when we were building a budget too,
Mm-hmm.
kind of imagining what it might be to build a home. We thought, oh my gosh, how will we ever be able to do that?
But we looked at properties, and we found what we thought was a great home. It had 3 bedrooms. It was spacious. It was on a big tree covered lot. It was on Sunshine Street, and we thought, oh wow, this might be it. And so we knew we needed to talk to the neighborhood association to be sure that they were okay with us. We wanted to be in a residential area, but we needed to talk to the neighborhood association. And so there were 2 of them, and we met with them one evening, and we had, our display, and we talked, and we told them all about the program and how wonderful it would be to be in their neighborhood, and that it was free and everything. And then we asked for questions, and this man stood up and he said, "Over my dead body, you're going to have a home right next door to me." And so we were like, oh my goodness. we didn't know we never expected that kind of a strong reaction, but he was adamant. He didn't want his grandchildren to know about people who were dying, that they might be dying next door. And so we kept looking. We kept looking for a property.
And at this point, we'd raised a significant amount of money. Through some of the board contacts, there were a couple of large donations that totaled about $50,000. So we were beginning to have some money in the bank to begin to imagine what it might be like to rent something or build something. And then one February in 2012, Patsy and I were having dinner with friends, and we were talking about what we were discovering in San Antonio in terms of property. And we were actively looking for something. We didn't know exactly what we would do. And as they heard what we were talking about, they offered ABODE a $150,000 loan for 10 years at no interest. And so we suddenly had some real resources to work with, and we were also planning in that year 2012 to have a fundraiser called Help Open Our Doors, which is going to be in October.
And the way that came about was I was doing a fundraiser helping someone else do a fundraiser at this beautiful place called Lambermont Mansion on Grayson. And I looked outside, and there was this pile of old doors, and it was in the driveway. And I said, "What are you going to do with those doors?" And the owner said they had just remodeled the mansion. She said, "Well, I hate it, but I'm just going to have to take them to the landfill because those are 1800s doors and we can't use them in the house." And I said, "I want them." And I had no idea what I was going to do with those. And immediately she sent her workmen with those 16 doors and delivered them to our house. And Edwin was like, "Are you crazy? What are we going to do with all those doors?" So we had a fundraiser called Open Our Doors, and we gave those 16 doors to local artists who painted wonderful, amazing, imaginative designs on those doors, and we auctioned them off, some as high as $5,000 each. And so at the end of the evening, which was at the mansion, we had made $36,000. And so together with that 150,000, we were kind of ready. But in the meantime, right before that fundraiser, a friend of ours who was one of our original supporters, Martin, who was a realtor, called us and said, I think I have the property for you. And so we went to look, and it was, lo and behold, a beautiful property on almost an acre of land with beautiful oak trees. And it was only, after we had looked all over town, it was only like 2 minutes away from the Church of Reconciliation, where we had had all our meetings, all our events, all our trainings, and every board meeting. And it was also 2 minutes away from our home, and right next door to some of our original founders, June and Richard Ferguson, and across the street from the Inn at Los Patios. So it was just perfect. And we knew right away that that was it. And it was within our budget.
Well, we had some money. We were able to pay cash for the home. And we were also able to begin to work with a grant writer to help us raise the money to build the home. The property had an old home on it, and ultimately we decided we couldn't save it. So we were able to design the home and have it built and raise the money to do that.
We had plans to remodel that old 1946 home, and right after that, we invited Gordon Hartman, who started Morgan's Wonderland, to come look at the plans. And he said, well, for the price of remodeling, you could build a new home. Our budget then was $250,000, and it ended up that we had to raise $650,000. But we did, and we raised all the money and didn't have a mortgage. So we opened in December of 2014. And we started taking our first guests.
You've got about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So, gosh, so we started taking guests. We would like also to tell you, that the stumbling blocks along the way that we experienced had to do with working with the builders, working with contractors. We also had some challenges after the home was built too that had to be rectified. And really, I would say that the challenges that we came up against were always managed by just realizing that we could trust the process. We didn't really find ourselves getting discouraged, wondering how we would ever do this. We started down the road, and we just kept moving ahead, and we were able to open the home and take care of our very first guest. And would you like to talk about one or two?
Our first guest was only 36, and his name was Scotty, and he had cerebral palsy, but he suddenly, it was discovered that he had stage 4 esophageal cancer too. And he came to our home, and to ABODE was our first guest, and he said, I'm too young to die. And it was really heart-wrenching. His dad had served in the Vietnam War and seen too much death, and he really didn't want to be at his own son's death. He didn't want to be present. And so we had just hired our executive director then, Jane Marie Young, and she talked to Scotty's dad. And in the end, his dad was in the quiet room, a beautiful part of the home, and decided he could go and be with his son as his son died. So it was a really beautiful reconciliation and being with a loved one at the end of life. And so that he was our first guest. And then we had Carolyn, and you'll hear about Carolyn later. She was 72 and had Alzheimer's. And then Mary was our third guest, and it was around Christmas time, and we were having our Luminaria event, our very first one, and we were caroling, singing, hymns, and went to her French doors. Every room has a French door that opens up to the outside, and we asked her what song she would like us to sing. And we sang Silent Night, and she died as we were singing it. So we've had some beautiful experiences. And I know that there have been many, many, many more. And we're so thankful for all the people that helped us to realize this dream, especially the volunteers and the staff and the board members along the way. And, you know, it was a long time and a long road, but we're really grateful for every little bit of it. And now we want to have Mary, our wonderful executive director, Mary, tell you about what is happening at ABODE now with all of the COVID-19 going on in the city after several months and a lot of hard work, sprucing things up and rewriting the policies and procedures. Our home ABODE has reopened, and we're so happy. And Mary's going to tell you all the precautions they've taken and all the work they've done to accept our guests again.
Thank you. Thank you, Patsy and Edwin. And this is the home. If you haven't been to ABODE, it's absolutely beautiful. From the moment you walk in the door, you can just tell that you've entered an incredibly special place. And one of the neat features when Patsy and Edwin and the early supporters were building the house, they wrote prayers on little pieces of paper in all different languages and all different religions, and pinned them to the insides of the walls. So the home is literally built on prayers. And I mean, you just feel it. I think anybody who's been to the house will agree. But the foundation that the Saseks and the early supporters and early volunteers built has just made our jobs a delight. And we just love what we do. Every day at ABODE, we are staffed around the clock. We work in shifts, and two of our end-of-life navigators are here on the call, John Vinson and Sarah Aguirre. They are just fabulous. And you'll also meet Diana and Claudia in a couple of sessions from now. They'll be talking about some of their favorite guest stories. We have a volunteer coordinator, Adriana. I know a lot of you know her, and you'll hear from her at the very end of this series. And together we are a small and mighty team. We keep things humming along. Before COVID, the house would also be filled with volunteers. These days, we still have very many volunteers, but we're doing things on Zoom. So our marketing committee is very busy. Our education committee brought this to us tonight. Our board is very active. Our fundraising team is very active. So there's plenty of volunteer things to do. Plus we have a huge yard, which always is in need of some good elbow grease out there. I think one of the neatest bits about ABODE and what makes us so different is the contemplative nature of what we do. And we'll learn more about that in the next session. And the Saseks gave you a good overview of it. It's something I've had to learn because it means being in the present and being focused and being very intentional. And I am a type A personality. If I'm trying to get from point A to point B, I want to hit 20 points in between. That's just the way I'm wired. And I've really had to learn to slow down and focus and be very, very present. All right, so when COVID came upon us, we shut down for a while. As the Sasek said, we actually met daily on Zoom as a staff. We went through all of our policies and procedures. We had lots of different guest speakers, including some experts in our community on contemplative care. We refreshed the house. Everything is squeaky clean again. And we've been working closely with the Omega Home Network, which we are members of, and attending their weekly Zoom webinars to share best practices, especially during the time of COVID. So after we spent plenty of time getting our new policies and procedures together and training on our protective equipment, we opened back up, and we opened to our first guest. Her name was Gloria. We only had her for a few days. Evidently she just needed some peace and quiet in order to pass away, and we were able to give her that. And then a week ago, we welcomed a lovely man named Mark, and his sisters are on the call with us this evening. So we're thrilled to have Mark and Terry and Pam as part of our family now. Brenda Cabeza, her mother was one of our guests, Miss Ruth, and of course Ed's wife, Carolyn. So what's so neat about Abode, one of the many things, is that our community keeps growing. As we welcome a new guest, our community grows by welcoming their loved ones and their friends. I get so touched just talking about it, but it's really special to make a difference in somebody's life at the very end of their life. And that's true too for their family and friends. And in the end, it's all about relationships in terms of what we do. Among our biggest challenges is fundraising. We offer our services for free. So we operate on individual donations from folks like all of us. And we also qualify for a limited number of grants. It's very competitive. We apply for way more than we actually get, but it's the grants and donations that provide us with the money we need to keep our doors open. And when you find folks who share our mission, it's a real treat to provide a way for them to support us as we support one another. So let's open it up to Q&A. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So yeah, we've got some questions here. And I'll just open this up. Mary, you can answer, or Edwin and Patsy, you can answer. Let's see, we're going to start with Alex first. This was a long one. He writes, coming from a Catholic background, the history of hospice originating within intentional religious communities resonates with me. As a doula in waiting, I am especially concerned with providing end-of-life care to traditionally marginalized communities and with exploring the idea of community as not being a static entity. In addition to educational outreach endeavors, how else does or would Abode address the needs of the dying among the homeless, the incarcerated, the working poor, the mentally ill, populations of color? Perhaps the perception, perhaps correctly, of end-of-life care, and this is especially true of the word doula, is that these are privileges reserved for a particular economic or social strata and not resources available to the many. There's a couple questions in there. First, let's talk about some of our guests that may have fit either these, homeless, incarcerated, working poor, mentally ill. What have we seen?
Well, I think one of the primary motivating factors of creating Abode was to create a place when folks didn't have anywhere else to go. So, gosh, a good majority of our guests have come from little to no income, and we've had several homeless folks that we've cared for, and then we've had others who come from different economic needs. But need is really one of the most important factors when we look at welcoming people to Abode. What do you think, Edwin and Patsy?
Oh, that's so true. And one of our very first guests, I remember, was a homeless immigrant who was living, who was in the Northeast Baptist Hospital. And as is the case, hospices most often aren't able to care for someone unless that person has some place to live, obviously, or caregivers. So we were able and so grateful to be able to offer the service. And I think too, one of the things that Abode has been able to offer the hospice organizations is a place like Abode, because there's none other like it. So reaching out to people of color, being sure that we're available to people, no matter what background they come from, is really a vital part of the mission.
For sure, for sure. Let's see, Ted Gibbs writes, I'm assuming that a doctor's order is required for placement. How does the process select who can or can't be accepted?
So we receive referrals from hospice. We like to work with hospice agencies, and there are about 100 of them here in San Antonio. So Beverly and April, who are on the call, work for Christus, and I think we've got some other hospice folks on the call. And for ABODE, we look for folks who are in their last 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days of life. So it has to be somebody at the end of life, and that's hard sometimes to gauge. And it has to be, we have to have somebody who's somewhat small, because we work 1 person per shift, and we're not strong enough to pick up a very large person. So it has to be somebody under 200 pounds. There are a couple of other parameters that means that we can't take these folks, but these here fit within those parameters. And then we go and see them. And if it seems like they're at the end of life, they recognize it, they want to come to ABODE, it has to be a good fit both ways, that they're a good fit for us to take care of, because we're not a medical facility. We're not a nursing home. We are a family home, and we take care of you just like a family member would. So all of our folks have some good background and training in healthcare and taking care of folks, but it's not like we're doctors and nurses. We're just good people who know how to love you up and make sure you're comfortable and you get what you need and want as you live your last bit of time. So then when we find somebody, there's lots of other factors that play into it. It's actually very complicated to get the stars to align. In fact, today we welcomed a new guest, so we now have 2 at ABODE, but it's quite a tap dance to get all the moving parts to match, and then we can bring someone in.
Thank you, Mary. So from Joanne, she's writing, are you currently accepting COVID positive patients discharged from the hospital with no other placement options?
That's the heartbreaker. We're not. And lots of reasons why. One is because we are such a tiny staff. There are just 4 navigators, and we have 2 freelancers, and I can fill in every now and again. But if 1 or 2 of us goes down, we don't have enough to staff, and we would have to close ABODE again, and we don't want to do that. Yeah. So we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that you're not going to catch COVID at ABODE. You may catch it somewhere else, but not at ABODE, and we're trying as best we can to keep it out. There is a resource here in San Antonio that is accepting COVID positive patients, and I'll have to look for that, and I'll send it and share it with you in the next session.
That was a tough decision. We talked a lot about that and did training just in case somebody is positive once they get there. But yeah, these aren't medical people. These are folks that have been trained, and to go in and just teach them infection control is a tough thing to do. Yeah.
I will say this, we talked about this as a staff. If a guest were to somehow contract COVID, even though we don't think that's possible, but anything's possible, we would likely keep that patient because there's nowhere else for that person to go. So we would then have to wear the face shields and the gowns and take even more precautions.
Yeah.
But we hope that won't happen.
Here's another good question. As a trained volunteer, are you expected to assist in personal bathing needs, etc., or is this part of the job of the navigator?
Typically, the hospice team includes a CNA, clinical nurse assistant. Is that what it is, Beverly?
A certified nurse assistant.
Certified nurse assistant. Okay, I'm new to this lingo too. So being new to ABODE. So typically that person will come 2 or 3 times a week, or however many times the hospice deems is necessary to take care of the guests. So we don't usually do the bathing, although we can in a pinch. But we do help people with their toileting, feeding, general cleanliness of the room. We do a little bit of everything, just as your family member would for you.
The one thing I might add, just to stress, is that ABODE follows the plan of care that the hospice wants for that particular guest, their patient, ABODE's guest, to follow. So really, that's the beauty of how it works, I think. The hospice agency has a place for a person they're caring for to go. And, who we are at ABODE as volunteers and staff people are people from the community who recognize that we can do this, which is a really wonderful thing to be able to realize that a person who is dying isn't undergoing a medical event. He's undergoing a spiritual social event, a process actually. So I think that's important, also an important feature of ABODE.
Okay, we have another question from April. Does ABODE have an age requirement?
What was the youngest age we had? I think there was a woman in her 20s.
20 something.
Yeah.
We just can't, we don't take babies yet. We haven't, but 20 and someone in their 20s was our youngest, I think.
And I don't think there is a requirement per se, is there?
No.
I think we would be as equipped to take a kiddo, a young person.
Even mom and dad would come with them.
Yeah.
There's a place to stay in each room for family members.
Mhm.
Each room is big and has a lovely fold-out queen-size sofa for families to stay. So, I think each guest is different, and it's decided on by the navigators and Mary at the time. If so, yeah.
Okay. How about this question? What is your biggest fundraiser? How do you raise money, and what's the biggest one? Which one do you look forward to the most?
Well, we've had to cancel 2 of them.
I know.
So far.
We've had good luck with the Big Give, which is an online day of giving, and we've had a couple of wonderful donors provide matching grants. So if you raise 10, we'll match 10. And we're going to be doing that again September 10th of this year. So if anybody wants to participate in that, we'd be very grateful. Our Luminarias in December is a nice fundraiser. It's not our biggest one, but it's certainly a beautiful one. Last fall, we did our Dias de los Muertos brunch, which brought in a nice amount of money. I don't know if we'll do that in person this year. It may have to be online. But probably the biggest one, Patsy, was your Open Our Doors event that you held. We're going into our 6th year, by the way, which is pretty incredible.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have a question for Patsy and Edwin. So has ABODE, did it achieve your dream? And what are your aspirations and hopes for the future for this place?
Oh my, yes, I guess, the vision was realized. Golly, it's kind of amazing to think back over these years and see that, that the process provides a way. And, I guess aspirations for the future, they're sort of, I would say that they're blended, they're mixed. That the one thing that we found out when we created the home and we did all the work and we got it built and we hired a executive director and we hired staff and we did the training and then we opened up the doors. I think what I remember so clearly is thinking, oh gosh, I hope it works. And to find out that it worked was just extraordinary. So, we are a 3-bedroom home because in the state of Texas, to have a home with more than 3 residents becomes a process of being licensed and regulated. So we fall under what's called the 3 and under type of personal care home. There really are no regulations for what we do, but that's how we fall into the pot. So we always felt like at some level that starting out with a 3-bedroom home is enough. And let's see how we do that. And then we also always imagined that we don't know what the future will bring. So I guess aspirations might be that ABODE continues to serve the way it is just right now.
And I'm really, really happy about the ABODE Academy because part of our mission is to provide for the community the art of living and dying. And so now this has begun, and we've had training before, but not to the whole community. And I'm really excited about this. And, you know, there've been some blessings along the way with this pandemic, believe it or not, you know, and one of them is Zoom, the possibility to do things on Zoom.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know if we could have 60 something people, you know, in a training. I don't, maybe we could. You know, to be together in a training is wonderful, but I feel like this is the next best thing, and I'm really excited about the process and the prospects of the next 7 Thursdays of being together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. Thank you all. Yeah, it's 7:32, so we're going to wrap it up. Don't forget your surveys. Those will come out on your emails tonight, so fill them out and send them back, please. And join us next week, same time. Denise Miner-Williams and Deb Hannes will share contemplative care and our mission, vision, and our values. So, you know, come for that. Know that these are all being recorded, and they're eventually going to be on the ABODE website, so you can always go back and listen again. But I thank you all for coming and joining us, and hope to see you next week.
Very good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Blessings.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.